In today's show, lessons from the Damian Lillard era. What the Blazers can learn from the last 11 years that can help them in the next 11. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen. Make it a part of your daily routine. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, an episode born whole cloth from a listener of the program. Listener Brandon straight up produced this entire episode. The first and probably last ever producer for a day program. Brandon pitched this idea to me, and we hashed it out over email, lockedonblazerspod@gmail.com. Brandon, full producer credit here. The first person to produce a episode of Locked On Blazers in the last 4+ years that isn't my wife or me. First person does live in my household to basically make up an entire episode. Brandon, full credit. Awesome work. Here's what we're doing in today's show. The lessons from the Damian Lillard era, looking at the sort of, I've broken it down into sort of 3 distinct eras of Damian Lillard's career, starting in 2012 and ending in question mark 2023. I think there are lessons to be learned in sort of the art and function of team building and lessons that perhaps can be applied to this new generation of talented youngsters. If Scoot Henderson is going to be, something like 85% of the player Dame is, it's probably like a low-level Hall of Fame career if you're 85% of Damian Lillard's production. The lessons garnered from 11 years of Damian Lillard, 11 plus, question mark, will help sort of build a better era into the future. So with the help of a literal Google Doc that Brandon sent me, I'm telling you, producer for a day, truly magical stuff. Full credit to listener Brandon. Proud Westview High School alum, go Wildcats. Former editor of The View. Shout out to all my high school newspaper editors out there. And anyone listening who may have worked with me on the East Chapel Hill Observer, you know who you are. In any case, I think the eras help us kind of figure out what went wrong, what went right, why it went that way. So let's start with what I'll call the first era of Damian Lillard basketball, the team that made sense. And it made sense in part because Dame was really good right away. Like, unanimous rookie of the year. He's the best point guard in his draft class, pretty clearly, and then he was the best point guard in his draft class without a doubt from day one. A double-double against the this is going to be fun Lakers. The moment he stepped on the court, unanimous rookie of the year. He was just great. He was great. They ended the season losing 13 straight games but they hung around in the playoff race longer than they should and allowed them to accelerate what was next. And the team that made sense, this is why it made sense, because they added Robin Lopez in the summer of 2013. Now, all of a sudden, they had a center to revamp the defense and not have it be J.J. Hickson. It allowed LaMarcus Aldridge to play his position, and now you had the perfect Damian Lillard lineup. A bulldog shooting guard in Wesley Matthews, a Swiss Army knife, long, rangy, small forward who could handle some playmaking responsibilities, could shoot a little bit, and was just a solid role player who could, if you needed to guard different types of wings, you had the powerful Wesley Matthews at 2, you had the length of Nick Batum at 3. It really made sense. And then behind Dame, a big old front line. What you needed with a Damian Lillard team was a big old front line, and 6'10", 6'11", LaMarcus Aldridge, 7-foot tall Robin Lopez. It made sense. And they won their first playoff series in 14 years when Damian Lillard hit a buzzer beater with 0.9 seconds remaining, beating the buzzer and beating the Houston Rockets. The era was upon us. This team made sense. And the following season in 2014-15 was the best team Damian Lillard ever played on. His third year in the league, he would never play on a better Blazers team. It's kind of sad in retrospect, but if you don't believe that nostalgia is always like, oh, what could have been, I find it somewhat joyous to remember this team. They were so stinking good. They ended up winning 51 games, but when Wesley Matthews went down with an Achilles tear in March, they were tied for the second best record. Actually, they beat the Mavs that night, and second best record in the West. Number two seed in the West. They were They were so stinking good. This was the beginning of the Warriors dynasty, right? They were about to win 60. They were on pace. They won 67 games and were about to start ripping off championships beginning this summer, but or spring, I guess, is when the championship is held. But the Blazers were really stinking good. They ended up losing in the playoffs to a 55-win Grizzlies team despite having home court advantage. The Blazers were the 4 seed, but the Grizzlies had a better record 5 seed. It's like they fixed the playoff seeding after this. But it ended just like that. The team that made sense with a starting lineup that made perfect sense around him, and Chris Kaman and Steve Blake, briefly Mo Williams, and a young C.J. McCollum and Myers Leonard, who kind of had one of his best playoff series ever in his career against the Grizzlies when folks got hurt, but specifically Chris Kaman stepped on someone's foot during practice and got hurt during the playoffs. It was a real nightmare of the end of the series. But this group that made sense, it ended quickly because LaMarcus Aldridge left. And the lesson here from the first era of Damian Lillard basketball is that the window is always smaller than you think. Your chance to be competitive with a really good team in the NBA is probably 2 years. Always things get extended, and the dynasties, it seemed like Golden State that's going to stick together forever, in part was propped up by an undermarket contract for Steph Curry and a blip in the 2016 cap spike that they allowed them to get Kevin Durant. It took some special factors, certainly, and great teams sort of have a way of overcoming trends. But I would say, generally speaking, the lesson learned from this first era of Damian Lillard and the Blazers is that your window to be really competitive, your window to be really good, is always smaller than you think. I would say treat it like the reverse stretch provision. If you think your era is 5 years, split it in half and take one off. So it's actually 2. If you think you have a 3-year window, you probably have a 1-year window. It is small. It is not, opportunity is not a lengthy visitor. And I think when you are good, you got to go for it. And I will say one thing that was not common in the remainder of sort of the Blazers Dame era was this year was the year they really went for it. This was a legitimately good team. And at the trade deadline, they traded 2 young prospects, really one young prospect and a first-round pick, Will Barton, who was a solid second-round guy, and T-Rob, Thomas Robinson, in exchange for Aaron Aflalo, a proven veteran who'd been really good in the league, and Aflalo basically just was not good from the moment he showed up in Portland, and his NBA career ended shortly thereafter. Just never fit, never worked. Sometimes it ends that way, and Aflalo was never a positive NBA player again after arriving in Portland. But they went for it. The trade at the time, that Aflalo trade at the time, was lauded across the league. I remember, I covered the team then on a daily basis. Greg Popovich, I still do now, but I was on the road and stuff. Greg Popovich, I remember him in a press conference saying the Blazers had one of the best trades of the trade deadline. It was lauded across the league, the Aflalo thing. It didn't work out, but they went for it. They tried to maximize their window because opportunity is not a lengthy visitor. When you get good, you have to basically, I don't know if you have to cash in every chip, but you do not ever overestimate how long you're going to have this chance. LaMarcus Aldridge walks in free agency in 2015. Blazers front office decided to tear everything else down, trading Nicholas Batum, letting Wesley Matthews, coming off the Achilles injury, walk, and restarting the era around Dame and CJ. Era number 2 is the era of hope, the solo era, and that's what we'll talk about in the second segment, the lessons from the second era of Damian Lillard's 3 clean eras on the Blazers, perfectly set up for a podcast that's in 3 segments. That's what we'll talk about in the second segment. Before we do that, I want to tell you about FanDuel right now. What an opportunity to take your first swing at betting on MLB at FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet and bonus bets up to $200. That's right. You just bet $20, you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting on everything from the money line, over-unders, Yerfies, Nerfies, who's going to hit the first home run, how many strikeouts the starting pitcher is going to have, whatever you want, you're going to find it on an app that's safe, secure, super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. All right. Damian Lillard, the first era, the team that made sense, was a lesson to that your opportunity is not going to stick around, not a lengthy visitor, to quote Daryl Morey, who's, I'm sure, quoting someone else. The second era is the solo era, as termed by producer for a day, Brandon. And by me, it's a new hope, because I'm nerdier than Brandon is, I think. The new hope happened quickly, right? They weren't supposed to be good. I think the funniest part of the 2015-16 Trailblazers is that they were trying to stink. They wanted to tank, and they couldn't do it. They ripped off 44 wins. It was a weird down year in the league in which that got them the 4 seed. You'll remember that the previous season they won 55 games and would have finished 51 games, and would have finished 5th in the West, had the 5th best record in the West. They won 44 games the following year and ended up with the 4th best record in the West. Weird year, weird down year in the Western Conference. Things sometimes break your way. They won a playoff series. They got into the second round and got smoked by the Spurs. But they were legitimately they were legitimately good. But they were ahead of schedule. And the front office, unfortunately, chose to mistake, as they would do, as Neil Olshey would do a bunch throughout his career, mistake good fortune, like they had good luck. A lot of things went right for him that year, for proof of concept. So he quintupled down on that era. Gave everybody the bag. Mo Harkless, you get the bag. Actually, Mo Harkless' contract was totally fine. He was the only one that got a reasonable deal. Myers Leonard got the bag. Who else was giving Myers Leonard $40 million? Nobody. Congrats to Myers. Take it to the bank. You do not have to give it back. Alan Crabb, whether you believe that it was Paul Allen wanting to match and not letting go, or Neil Olshey saying, that this guy's pretty good. They gave Alan Crabb $75 million. That's wild. That's a wild thing to do in the summer of 2016. Congrats to Alan Crabb. You also don't have to give that money back, but there's no way Alan Crabb is going to live up to that contract. It was impossible. And then they signed Evan Turner in free agency for $70 million. They mistaked proof of concept, they mistaked good fortune for proof of concept. Okay, quadruple down on everyone that's already on the roster. Give them a bajillion dollars. As much money as you could possibly hand out. Extend C.J. McCollum. Make it happen. They agreed to a contract extension. It didn't kick in till later, but that was after his 3rd year. So everyone you could pay, everyone you could possibly pay, make sure you pay them. And they weren't very good. They weren't very good in 2016, and they had to be bailed out by trading for Yusuf Nurkic. And it worked out really well, because when Nurk got here, he pushed him into the playoffs, and they weren't very good, and he got hurt right at the end of the year and missed the playoff series. But and it kind of, they kept Denver out of the playoffs, and he famously said, "I hope Denver has a happy summer. I hope they have a happy summer." But they lose to the 2017 Warriors, who were on their revenge tour after losing to LeBron's Lakers, and they had or LeBron's Cavaliers, and they had also added a pretty good player to the mix during that same summer. This was where it really went wrong in the Dame era, was the summer of 2016. The summer of 2017, they bungled the 2017 draft. I think a little too much is made of the Blazers bungling the 2017 draft. Go look at the top 10 picks in the 2017 draft. They bungled it too. I think when you get deep enough, it's like, oh, you should have had Donovan Mitchell. It's like, he went 13th. You should have had Bam. He went 14th. Like, it's like, oh yeah, John Collins, OG Anunoby, deeper in the teens, right? It's like, absolutely, they should have drafted those dudes. But like, Josh Jackson went 4th or whatever, 5th. The Blazers absolutely bungled the 2017 draft, and it cost them maybe the whole Damian Lillard era, because of the summer of 2016, summer of 2017, the back-to-back summers. It probably cost them like a chance to be really good with Dame. But I think they should have nailed it. Analysis of the 2017 draft is like, yeah, everyone should nail every draft. Like, yeah, well, they absolutely should. I think both the Blazers got it wrong and it's hard to draft are both true at the same time. Here's the thing, though. Following that 2017-18 season, they were really freaking good. They won another 51 games. They finished third in the West, and they got bounced out the playoffs. That's when they should have blown it up. But Dame didn't want him to blow it up. He didn't want him to blow him. Didn't want him to trade CJ. Didn't want to fire Neil. Didn't want him to fire Terry. He met with the ownership and met with met with front office and kind of said, give us another chance. We're good enough to overcome this. And so they kept doing it again. And they ran it back one more time in 2018-19, and they had really nice little moves around the margins that year, right? Like this was Zach Collins' best year, the 2017 draft pick, and the guy that's like a totally competent NBA player, but is certainly not a star and not the guy who's going to bridge the gap to the next era, which is what they absolutely needed. He had his best year. Rodney Hood ended up being a really solid addition. Seth Curry, who was on a prove-it deal coming off an injury for a one-year deal, he was really good. They got Enes Kanter in the buyout market because they were good. Good teams can be in the buyout market. They were good. They got Enes Kanter in the buyout market, and they went on a run. And when Jusuf Nurkic got hurt that spring, it didn't matter because they just got hot, and the bracket broke right for them. They tried to lose game 82, but Anthony Simons wouldn't let them and scores 37 playing every single minute. And the Kings also pulled all their starters in the second half, and the Blazers came back from down 25. And so instead of, they went to OKC. They played OKC in the first round, who they were trying to avoid because they were worried about their length. Here's a quick one for you. The Blazers video department had not finalized their OKC package after game 82, and they were heading into the playoffs 2 days later, and they had to they were so convinced they were going to lose, they hadn't finalized their playoff scouting package for the team they were about to play. But they beat them. Dame went nuts in the first round. CJ goes nuts in the second round. They make the Western Conference Finals. It's truly the height of the Damian Lillard era. It's what producer for a day, Brandon, called storybook stuff. It's storybook stuff. It really was. They screwed up 2016 summer. They screwed up the 2017 draft. They flopped super hard in the 2018 playoffs, but they kept doing it, and they reached the highest heights. And here's the weird thing about the 2019. It is the most rewarding, most fun, best season of Damian Lillard's career. And if you really want to talk about holistic team building, it shouldn't have happened. They should have torn it down. It shouldn't have happened like that. Maybe they should have had multiple other chances to make the Western Conference Finals, but it shouldn't have happened like that. The lesson from this era of the Damian Lillard basketball is that when you have a good thing, you have to continue building incrementally. You cannot commit to it all at once, and if you continue to run back basically the same thing, you're going to get stuck. And that's what happened in 2019. Jusuf Nurkic was going to be out for the year with a broken leg. They were coming up on the expiring contracts of Evan Turner, who was, had not been very good, but had a nice little playoff run. Mo Harkless was expiring. Myers Leonard was expiring. And all these guys that had been part of this era who weren't like special trade chips that were going to like get you the next thing, they pivoted off of. They had chosen not to bring back Ed Davis the previous year. Al-Farouq Aminu walked this summer because they chose not to re-sign him. They had tripled and quadrupled down on this thing so many times that they decided to go in another direction because they knew that this was a special year that they couldn't repeat, but they had waited too long. And so when they pivoted, the pivot was underwhelming. And I will say that trading for Hassan Whiteside, I'm not a Hassan Whiteside guy, but trading Mo Harkless and Myers Leonard for Hassan Whiteside this summer is totally fine. Way better probably to start Hassan Whiteside 70 games than it would have been to start Myers Leonard at 70 games at center. But he wasn't good, and the roster wasn't any good, and they couldn't bring Enes Kanter back, and Rodney Hood got hurt towards Achilles, and Zach Collins got hurt 3 games into the season, and an incredibly thin front court that they had built that was just going to be Zach Collins and just going to be Rodney Hood, who's like probably a 2, playing a bunch of backup power forward minutes and probably playing in the closing lineup as a 4. That dream was done. It was done by December. And then, also that summer they signed Pau Gasol. Thank you for that note. Thank you for that new note, producer for a day, Brandon. And then they brought in Melo because they had to bring in Melo. And Melo was out of work and he was a fun part of it. But this is really the new era. So let's talk about, after that 2019 getting to the mountaintop, this 2019 season that I've just laid out for you, it is the beginning of the downhill ascent and getting us to where we are here with Damian Lillard. The lesson from this middle era is, when you have a hopeful group, you cannot keep doing the same thing again. Sisyphus does not work in the NBA, and it certainly doesn't work with decent teams. It might work with teams at the very top. Continuity has value, but teams in the middle, and the Blazers were in the middle very consistently, keep running the same thing again. We're okay. You know what that gets you? It gets you an okay team that eventually fizzles out, and that's what it did leading into this 2019-2020 season. Let's talk about the third era of Damian Lillard's career with the Blazers and what lessons we can learn from that one in the third segment. Join me there, won't you? Still a pass first point guard. Still Mike Richmond. Still listen to Locked On Blazers. Still talking about the year that Pau Gasol was on the Trailblazers. The storied 2019-20 season. So I kind of laid out how they got here, right? Whole new parts. Rodney Hood gets hurt. Zach Collins gets hurt. The world changes forever in March of 2020. Outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The novel coronavirus arrives, and it changes everything forever. For way worse, to be clear. And they go into the bubble, and the Blazers stunk this year because the roster just didn't make sense. As it turns out, playing Carmelo Anthony and Hassan Whiteside as your front line, it leads to a terrible defensive front court. And you couple that with Dame and CJ up front, and you're a mess. The lessons learned, the team that really made sense early in Damian Lillard's career just never fully materialized again. And this was the beginning of the end. This is what I call the downward momentum era, and what producer for a day, Brandon, calls the Dark Ages. And it really was. It was the beginning of the Dark Ages. They had the really fun bubble run where Damian Lillard was great, and Carmelo Anthony was great, and Gary Trent Jr. was great, and CJ McCollum had a monster game in the play-in game to beat Memphis, and they got into the playoffs of the 8th seed, and they got swatted by the eventual champion Lakers. Dame got hurt. He didn't even finish the playoff run, and the Lakers, as a 1 seed, did what 1 seeds do, and they rolled over an 8 seed. And this was really the beginning of the end. They knew that they weren't good, right? And they knew they were going to move in another direction, but they were going to get Nurk back, and they were going to, the core was still there. The lessons from that middle era, they still kept bumping into it again. And so you still got Dame, and you still got CJ. Now you've got an ascending Anthony Simons, and they end up, flipping Gary Payton again. Come on. Gary Trent Jr. For Norman Powell. Oops All Guards, the initial Oops All Guards lineup. And the Blazers are good. They're not that's the thing about this. They're still pretty good. They're not one of the good teams that can win a title, but they're pretty decent. And they're facing the Nuggets, who have a Facu Campazzo and Austin Rivers backcourt. That's their guards heading into the playoffs. And Nikola Jokic was on his way to ascending to being the great player that he is in the 2021 playoffs. But the Blazers, again, a decent but not awful team, right? A decent but not awful team. They kind of dumped some of the parts that didn't make sense. The team started to make a little more sense, less Trevor Ariza, Carmelo Anthony action, but still mellow and still still a team that was going to be bad on defense yet again. You bring back Enes Kanter round 2, and they lose in the playoffs. They lose to a team that they're worse than in the playoffs. So in 2020, a roster bungling and a bunch of just bad injuries. Like, the roster was really thin, and then injuries got them, right? But they were still doing the same thing. The 2020-2021 season, which started in December of that year, and it was the shortened season, they were healthier. They looked like they were going to be competitive, and they were competitive, but they weren't good. And when they lost to a team that was worse than them talent-wise in the playoffs, Just straight up worse than them. Jokic was great in playoffs. This is kind of the beginning of his like true ascendance of being like, this dude balls when the lights are on. Damian Lillard has 55 in a game that they lose. Near perfect offensive night from Dame. 55 points, 10 assists, was incredible. But Robert Covington missed a dunk. CJ McCollum steps out of bounds, and in the final minute of that game, they crumble. They crumble on the road. They come back to Portland. They get smacked. Series ends. What the heck? And that's when, after from 2019, 2 years of kind of just it not being the thing, and the bubble season you can kind of wipe out, but they weren't good. They were bad that year. They're legitimately just a bad basketball team. Very expensive team, but not a good team. And then in 2021, they lose that game. And that is when I think it crystallized for Dame that perhaps his future wasn't here. But it didn't happen in the bubble, and it didn't happen in 2021. It happened because of that lesson from the middle era, is that you can't keep doubling down. When you have something hopeful, you can't keep doubling down. 2021, he very openly considered asking for a trade. In fact, it's reported by Henry Abbott of True Hoop that Damian Lillard's about to ask for a trade, and Dame kind of fights back and forth online with him, and then has a press conference in which he says that that's not true, but I haven't decided what my future will be. At that point, Damian Lillard was under contract for 3 more years. Someone saying I haven't decided what my future will be when he's under contract for 3 more years sounds a lot like a trade request, y'all. It wasn't a formal trade request, but it did sound like someone openly contemplating that. Later that summer, he meets with LeBron James and Anthony Davis at LeBron James' house. They famously have pink wine and Caesar salad, according to the reporting from Chris Haynes. And a detail I will never forget. They drink their pink wine. They have their Caesar salad. They're on LeBron James' rooftop, somewhere in the west side of LA. I don't know where he lives. Someone does. And Dame really considers it. Then that winter, Neil Olshey gets fired. Prior to that, the Blazers president on the business side walks away pretty quickly. There's clearly a whole bunch of bad stuff going on in the organization, and everybody is getting out while they can or getting kicked out because of the bad stuff that's going on. Season goes awry. They've hired Chauncey Billups. That roster was pretty good, but there's just like pretty bad juju. Like, that's a playoff roster. I'll maintain that. That 21-22 team is a playoff roster when the season starts. That's a good basketball team. Not a team that could have competed for a championship, but absolutely one of the 8 best teams in the Western Conference. But they didn't play like it. They stunk, and Dame was hurt, and that really submarined them because Chauncey Billups was still playing him 40 minutes a night, and he was bad at basketball. Dame gets... Joe Cronin takes over, Dame gets surgery, and they super tank the end of the year, and they draft Shaedon Sharpe. We didn't know it at the time, but we were watching the start of a rebuild. That's according to me, and also I'm reading it right here on the beautiful Word doc provided me by Brandon, producer for a day. So the beginning of the end had already happened when they lost to Denver. That was the end of the era, as it pretty clearly seems, right? But get Chauncey Billups, you stink that year, you tank. Damian Lillard signs a fat contract extension adds 2 years. Well, the way it works is he opts into a player option that he had because you have to opt in and extend. He opts in, inks that 2023-2024 deal, says, yeah, I'll pick that up, $43 million, and adds on 2 years and $122 million, the full 35% max contract available to him because he's played 10 years of service. So he goes ahead and gets the big old contract. And the Blazers come into this year with a totally incomplete roster from day one. What Joe Cronin acknowledged as redundancy, and he tried to sell to us as a evaluation year. But to me, it seems like a year where they weren't really committed to being good. They were kind of halfway in. And if you're halfway in, you are all the way out. All the way out. Blazers, again, super aggressively tank the final 10 games of the season. They draft Scoot Henderson, and Damian Lillard, a week later, asks for a trade, and we end up here. And the lesson from the third era of this Damian Lillard era, of this Damian Lillard, 3 eras here, is like, opportunity is not a lengthy visitor. You can't keep doubling down on mediocrity. And finally, the lesson is that all things end badly or they wouldn't end. It kind of really started in 2021, and here it finally crystallized because it took a little while and because of the incentive to sign a big contract that Dame had. And he was under contract until at least, he would have been heading into potential free agency the next summer if he wanted to get there. Like, it was, there was some benefit in the Blazers signing him to a contract, because otherwise he would have really had a lot of leverage, because he would have been a chance to opt out, chance to just like, okay, I'm leaving if you don't, whatever. I'm leaving regardless. So trade me where I want to go. There's like some legitimate leverage to the Blazers adding Dame to this giant contract. It might not work in the end. It might not work. But the lesson is really that things only end badly. They only end badly. The dark ages happen slowly. They didn't happen all at once. They happened in the bubble, and they happened in the following year, and then they happened, whatever this season was, where they made decisions that Dame said, hey, do this and this and this. It doesn't happen all at once, but when it ends ugly. And so that's kind of the lesson that I think is important to impart to this next era. I don't know that Damian Lillard or Scoot Henderson's going to be Damian Lillard. I don't know if Shaedon Sharpe's going to be Damian Lillard. I don't think every time it's going to be Damian Lillard. Dame is like a 0.05% outcome of any NBA career. He's really one of the all-time greats. It's the sad part about the way his Blazer career is likely to end, because he should be appreciated in the way that it's sad the way Drexler's career ended, because he should be appreciated. And I think people appreciate him, but he never really came back to like allow people to love on him. I think Dame will come back, but it might be sour for a little bit for some folks. We'll see. I don't expect the like disappear forever Clyde Drexler approach, but certainly when you ask out and when it might end up, a messy exit, it doesn't leave anybody feeling good about what happened. But the thing to take away as they move forward is that you don't have a big opportunity. But I would say that middle era is more akin to where they are now. It's like build incrementally. This year, they don't have to be good, but if they have a chance to get a little bit better, right? 5 to 11% better, get 5 to 11% better. You can't swing all the way down and then swing back up. It's just not how it's going to work for them. They've spent 2 seasons pretty much in the trough, and they're probably likely to spend another season pretty close to the trough. If not, they're going to be one of the bad teams. I think that I'm pretty confident they'll have one of the 6 or 7 worst records in the league this year, just because they're super young. It's just kind of how it works. But you got to build incrementally. You cannot keep doubling down on mediocre. And then when you do build something effective, right? If you are a 50-win team in a couple seasons in a row, right? If you win, 51 games in a couple straight years, or 49 and 51, I believe is back to back. It's like that's when it's time to cash in. You can't wait. You cannot wait, because if you do wait and you do double down, then you end up in this situation where it is a slow and inevitable crash, because eras don't last forever. If the Blazers want Scoot Henderson to be on the team for the next 9 years, he's going to be on the team for the next 9 years. He's under contract for 4. He'll enter restricted free agency. They can offer him a 5-year deal. No one else can. They can match any deal he gets on the open market. So at worst, we're talking 8 seasons of Scoot. Talking the same deal with Shaedon Sharpe if they want him. He could be under contract for another 7 or 8 years. They've got a window to be good, but the lessons from the Dame era about how small your window actually is, and how you cannot mistake good fortune for proof of concept. And if you do, you can end up in a slow spiral that will just end poorly, because it is so hard to pivot to the next thing after being stuck in the same thing for so long. Don't get stuck. Build incrementally and know that your window is small. So take the risks. The Blazers never took the risks. And then by the time they took risks, it was too late. And the person taking the risks was taking risks to go young, not to get good. Those are the lessons from the Damian Lillard era. I really hope that however this Dame run ends in Portland, that there is a time that we can all appreciate how special and how good he was. I will certainly try to do that here. For now, I hope that the Blazers can learn from the mistakes they made during the Dame era to make sure that the Scoot, Shaden, Amphrey, Simons next era of Blazers basketball is a really good one. Okay, come back for tomorrow's show. It's going to be a whole bunch of fun. We're going to talk about the art of rebuilding. I got a couple hosts from other Locked On shows whose teams have been through it and how you go from not very good to pretty darn good, and the sort of pitfalls that you can get caught in along the way. You're not going to want to miss that one. Come back for that show. Tell your friends about the program. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.